Welcome back. Banning words doesn't sound like a very American way of life thing to do, does it? We should be getting used to it, though. Here in Florida, the unwritten policy of Governor Rick Scott to state employees don't use the phrase climate change. Now, at the Centers for Disease Control, you know, that science-y health organization run by the federal government, employees are reportedly being told don't use terms like science-based, diversity, transgender. So let's get this straight. The president can say S-hole in the Oval Office, but you'd be in real trouble if you use science-based there. Joining us for more is Susan Nylon of the Nylon Report and Dr. Prerak Shukla of the Can Community Health. And thank you both for joining us.
Sure.
And Susan, put this into context as someone who is interested in civil liberties about these stories and what you're hearing.
You know, putting it into context, it's kind of hard to actually put some logic to it because, you know, we're all adults. These words are well-founded, well-grounded in science-based evidence. They're a part of our culture. When you start to tell people what words they can't use, you are not only censoring it, but you're not being fully honest with what they're talking about, and you're manipulating the conversation. Since
this story first came out, the Centers for Disease Control has pushed back and basically said, well, we don't technically mean that these words are banned, but that basically it is a suggestion that it's not so much a ban, but recommendations to avoid some language to ease the path towards budget approval by the Republicans. Doctor, if you're in a position that you are trying to seek federal funding for certain projects and you're told, hey, listen, heads up, you're dealing with a conservative Congress, maybe you should avoid using these kinds of terms. Isn't that basically a way to get what you need?
Yes, it's pretty much putting a bias in our studies, and that's something that we don't try to do. We try to find the facts, report them as we do find them. Banning these words would have a great limitation on that. You're singling out groups that don't need to be singled out.
Like which groups?
Like the transgender group. They need to have it spoken for. They need to know that there's our certain health issues with them that if we don't study, if we don't know what it's about, then we cannot address it.
But it's not just transgender or issues in terms of HIV. We're talking about science-based, evidence-based, and suggestions to phrase that in different ways, Susan.
Yeah, and the question is, what do you replace it with? You know, and how honest is that really being? Is the government actually condoning the idea that we're going to manipulate our words in order to be able to get funding? I think that's just a poor excuse, and if Congress can't be adult about it, then, you know, we have a serious problem.
I'll quote a former CDC official who says they're not saying not to use it in your request for money because it will hurt you. It's not about censoring what the CDC can say to the American public. It's about budgetary strategy to get funded.
Yeah, but some of the words they're talking about are a fetus, you know, or, you know, just, I mean, you mentioned climate change. What do you say? I really think it goes beyond they're just being sensitive to what Congress doesn't want to hear. I think they're truly manipulating the conversation. I think they're trying to change the words that we're accustomed to using so we can change the dialogue.
Doctor, don't physicians and public health officials sometimes have to play political games when seeking money from whether it's a local government, state government, or the federal government?
It's hard to say, but there's no room for politics when it comes to science and to treating everyone. When you have a large government organization like the CDC, you want them to report what it is, as it is. Now, why all of a sudden for these change of these words that they have been using for decades now? That's what's the real question. Why change it now? What is your honest goal to try to replace it with? Words like science-based, evidence-based. Now, if you were to take a medication that you had no science behind or evidence behind, would you feel okay taking it?
Right. All right, we are just getting warmed up. We'll have much more on the 7 dirty words at the CDC right after we check the first alert weather. Stay with us. Welcome back. Remember George Carlin and the 7 dirty words you can't say on television? Well, apparently the Trump administration reportedly has its own list of 7 dirty words at the Centers for Disease Control. Employees are not allowed to say science-based, fetus, transgender, vulnerable entitlement, diversity, and evidence-based. Joining us for more is Susan Nylon of the Nylon Report and Dr. Prerak Shukla of CAN Community Health. Welcome back, everyone. Doctor, let me read you something and get reaction to it. And that is that according to what the rules or the suggestions are, instead of using science-based or evidence-based, the suggested phrase the CDC bases its recommendations on science in consideration with community standards and wishes. Do you have a problem with that?
I do. I feel like they're diluting the word of the actual meaning, and they're just trying to please and appease everyone to make him feel better, but it's not the actual word that they should be using.
When you're doing research into whether it's HIV or anything else for that matter, and you're trying to look for scientific facts and ideas in terms of how to move forward, what does community standards and wishes have to relate to it?
It does not. It has no actual bearing in our scientific research. You're going after the objective. You're looking for the data. You're collecting it. You're not asking the community what it is. You're setting out a hypothesis. You're seeing where it goes, whether it's 2 years or 3 years, and you're going forward. There's no need for the community to know about it that way.
Susan, of course, we're seeing things like this in other federal agencies, including the EPA, where there are whole sections on climate change that are being taken off. The pages are being taken down. Employees there are also being told what not to say.
You know, I think it's really funny too, because reference was made in the last segment that the justification was that that government don't like these words. The only people that have changed are the administration. Congress has been there. Most of the people have been there for really long periods of time. There's no all of a sudden, oh, I don't like these words now. I think that's a pure manipulation. I also think it's discriminatory. When you can't use the word transgender, you're completely dismissing a part of the population who were desperately trying to gain rights. And if we start to ignore those words for whatever reason, we're actually undermining the validity of that individual. And, you know, there's some serious things. Plus, I also want to say, what part of the public actually reads these applications? You know, it's not like and you could tell me different, but it's not like I sit down at the breakfast table and pull out some of your funding and say, what do they call it today? You know?
Right, but you're still, I mean, you are still a federal agency that is seeking funding from the Congress. Shouldn't there be a kind of a strategy in terms of how best to approach Congress in terms of getting what you want for the research that you want to do?
Yes, but these federal agencies are run by people appointed by the administration. And again, there hasn't been a requirement up until now. So Congress didn't have a problem before with those words. Why all of a sudden are they having a problem now? I really don't believe it's Congress. I believe it's the administration and the appointees that are now ahead of the agency.
Well, one might argue they won. And they can, therefore, they are there, and that they believe that this president and this party was elected to go forward with this agenda.
You know, one person won the election, and then he appointed everybody in the spot. They all didn't win. And the bottom line is they work for us, and we have every right to demand the truth. And if they're starting to manipulate the words, they're not telling the truth.
Doctor, I do have questions for you, but I want to ask what does Susan, I mean, can't you make the argument that it was the same deal with Obama, that Obama brought in a whole host of policies and directions to go into that were more reflective of his political philosophy?
Absolutely, and I have absolutely no problem with that argument, except the fact that I don't believe his administration came in and said, here's a list of vocabulary words that you're not allowed to use. I mean, that's a lot different. You're not just coloring it, the story different. This is not a news report that we're asking you not to use colorful words on. This is actual scientific documents that people's lives depend on. Why would you not tell the truth?
Doctor, are you concerned that what is being funded in terms of research and scientific exploration is going to be affected by some of these policies that are being put into effect?
Yes, if these policies do get placed, then yeah, funding might change. And that sucks for research and for the betterment of the population. And these words, they are what they are. They're scientific words. Now changing them after so many years, after decades. I agree when she said it's just a manipulation. And there's no reason for that. There's no room for that.
What is the impact on what you do and the community that you serve here on the Suncoast?
I'm sorry?
What is the impact that this conversation, this issue, will have on you and your work with the patients that you see here on the Suncoast?
No, we work largely with the LGBTQ population, and the medications that we do research are primarily focused at HIV-positive patients. And we have to look at it. If one of our patients do get pregnant, is there a risk to the fetus? What can we do to prevent it? What part of it can we stop, change, alter, or even monitor to make sure that there will be no changes or no abnormal birth defects?
So if you do this research and you're sending it to Atlanta where the CDC is based, are you concerned that your findings will be manipulated in a way using other words that may make it less accurate than it should be?
With the way this administration is playing out, probably yes.
Okay.
That's sad. Very
Right.
sad.
Susan, where's the pushback on this? Because after all, I mean, there's a lot going on in Washington right now. We're on a budget deadline right now, and Congress and Democrats in Congress have their hands full with other things.
Yeah, sure, but the pushback is the elections of this year. You have Paul Ryan that is extremely nervous about what's going to happen. Just an election the other day that was strong Republican hold for decades went to a Democrat. So the public right now has a lot of power. There's a march on Saturday to remind everybody about the March on DC last year at this time. You know, the public doesn't have to stand for this. The public doesn't have to say, I'm willing to accept it and hold my nose until the term changes. They have got to stand and hold everyone accountable. And that means get on the phone and call your congressman.
Doctor, just to give us some idea of what we're talking about here, let's just take one word, transgender, and how not using that word affects what you do, your work, and your research.
So even within our own clinical trials, we do have a population that is transgender. Now, by removing that word, you're kind of implying that you don't have a care for this group of people. Is that what they want to portray? Is that what they want to make the community happy about? That, okay, we've just omitted this. We don't care. We don't want to know. Is that what they want to do? Is that what they see? That's not fair to that community as well.
But there is a debate in our society right now, whether it's transgender in the militaries or the issue in terms of bathrooms, where you do have a certain amount of the population that thinks that we talk about these issues and too much.
We do, because it is a concern. They have their rights. Why shouldn't they bring it up? If that's what they feel that they need or they deserve, then it should be brought up. It should be fought for.
Okay, we have to take a quick break, and we'll be back for final thoughts in a moment. And our guests join us right now for final thoughts. And Susan, there was a point that you wanted to make.
You know, it's really disturbing when we remove one word from the English language and we completely ignore an entire population. Their intent is not just to make it easier to pass to Congress. Their intent is to not acknowledge the transgender community, and to me, that's egregious. I mean, that's worthy of, people taking serious issue with it. The same thing when you're talking about a community and you are describing them as vulnerable. They are. Why would you not call them that?
But as we reported earlier, it's not unprecedented. If you work for the state of Florida, you are not allowed to use the term climate change.
Correct. And again, even though I got to tell you, they're not as strict about it. I think it's more publicity than anything else, because they can't stop the public from using it. They can't stop the press from using it. So are they manipulating? Yeah, but it's been rather unsuccessful.
Doctor, is this really going to impact the way that you treat your patients and go about doing your research?
No, it will not. I'll continue doing it the way I've been trained, and ethically, logically, and under the Hippocratic Oath, I will continue to do it.
But what's your biggest concern?
That they will win and then these words will be removed, and certain subsects of our own community will not have the issues raised for their own help.
All right. Thank you both for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Okay. Before we go, we want to share with you what some of you had to say about last night's show on affordable housing. Police officers, firefighters, teachers may all have a hard time affording a house on the Suncoast. The average salary for police officers is $57,000, which falls below the national average. Elementary school teachers make about $47,000 a year, which is about 8% less than the country's average. But housing in Sarasota is 9% above the national average, with workers making 8% less than the county's average annual salary. We went to Facebook to see what some of you have to say, and Emily says that's all fine until there's no working class left in Sarasota to take care of the retirees. If Sarasota doesn't figure out affordable housing or increase wages, the city will suffer. It's just not sustainable. Matthew says an awful lot of Sarasota County employees have to live in Bradenton because they can't afford to live in the county that they serve. If my rent goes up anymore, I'll be one of them. Christina says the lack of light rail and commuter rail services in this part of the county adds another layer to the issue. If we did have reasonable public transit, then living 45 minutes away from where you work wouldn't be such a big deal. Well, if you'd like to join the conversation on tonight's topic, just visit our Facebook page at facebook.com/mysuncoast.com.abc7. FYI, you can watch past discussions on demand. They're available on Apple TV, Amazon Fire, and Roku. And for the latest on local breaking news, don't forget to download the updated version of our app. If your current app doesn't work, it's because it's expired. Just go to the App Store and re-download it by searching for WWSB or My Suncoast. We want to thank both our guests for being here tonight, Susan Nylon of the Nylon Report and Dr. Prerak Shukla of CAN Community Health.